The canvas duffel bag lay on Johnny Cash's bed, half-packed with everything a 12-year-old boy thought he'd need to become a musician in Memphis. 2 shirts, 1 pair of pants, his grandfather's harmonica, a notebook where he'd been writing song lyrics that didn't quite rhyme yet, but felt true in ways he couldn't explain, and hidden at the bottom, wrapped in an old handkerchief, the 73 cents he'd saved from picking cotton. It was March 1944, and Johnny Ray Cash was preparing to run away from home. The small wooden house in Dyess, Arkansas felt like it was collapsing inward since Jack died. His older brother, his best friend, the person who'd made their poverty feel like an adventure rather than a sentence, gone in a brutal sawmill accident 6 months ago. The house still smelled like Jack somehow, or maybe that was just Johnny's imagination refusing to let go. Either way, staying felt impossible. Their father, Ray Cash, had retreated into himself and drink, spending days in the fields working until exhaustion made thinking unnecessary. Their mother, Carrie, moved through the house like a ghost, performing the motions of motherhood, but with her essential self locked away somewhere grief couldn't reach. The other children, Roy, Louise, Reba, Joanne, Tommy, they were managing their own versions of survival. But Johnny was drowning, 12 years old, and convinced that the air in this house would suffocate him if he stayed another day. The guilt was the worst part. The knowledge that he'd been supposed to go fishing with Jack that morning, but had chosen to go to town instead. If he'd been there, maybe he could have prevented the accident. Maybe Jack would still be alive. Maybe this family wouldn't be broken. So Johnny had decided Memphis, the city he'd heard about on the radio, where music happened, where the Grand Ole Opry broadcast from, where people made livings playing guitars instead of picking cotton. He didn't have a plan beyond getting there. He was 12. Plans were for adults who thought things through. He just knew he couldn't breathe here anymore. The train tracks ran half a mile from their house, cutting through Dyess on their way to Memphis and beyond. Johnny had walked those tracks hundreds of times, counting the wooden ties, feeling the rails hum when trains approached. He knew the schedule loosely, freight trains mostly, a few passenger cars, all heading north toward the cities and away from the cotton fields. Tonight was the night. He'd picked it carefully. His father was working late, his siblings were asleep, and the moon was nearly full, bright enough to walk by but dark enough to hide in shadows. He finished packing the duffel bag, tested its weight, and crept toward the bedroom door. His mother was sitting at the kitchen table. Johnny froze. Carrie Cash sat in the dim lamplight, her Bible closed in front of her, hands folded, looking directly at him. Not surprised. Not angry. Just present, like she'd been waiting. "Mama," Johnny whispered. I know what you were doing," Carrie said quietly. Her voice carried the particular exhaustion of a woman who'd buried a son 6 months ago and was watching another one try to disappear. "Come here." Johnny approached slowly, the duffel bag heavy in his hand, caught between shame and defiance. He set the bag down at his feet and stood there, waiting for the lecture or the tears or the command to go back to bed. Instead, Carrie stood up, walked to the coat rack and pulled on her thin jacket. "If you're going to the trains, I'm going with you." "What?" "You heard me. If my son is going to run away tonight, I'm at least going to walk him there." She picked up a worn blanket from the chair. "It's cold. We'll need this." Johnny stared at her, completely off balance. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to stop him or cry or make him feel guilty enough to stay. Walking him to the trains himself felt like permission, and permission made the rebellion feel hollow. "Mama, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," Carrie said, opening the door. "You think leaving will make the pain stop. You think if you run far enough, you won't feel Jack's absence, or your father's grief, or your own guilt. You think Memphis is the answer because it's not here." She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much loss, but hadn't lost their clarity. "I understand completely. Now come on. The trains won't wait." They walked through the Arkansas night in silence, mother and son, heading toward the railroad tracks that had always represented escape to Johnny and probably represented danger to Carrie. The March air was cold enough to see their breath, and the moon painted everything in silver and shadow. When they reached the tracks, Carrie spread the blanket on the ground, a safe distance from the rails, and sat down. She patted the space next to her. Johnny sat, confused and increasingly unsure about this whole plan. "What train are you planning to catch?" Carrie asked, as casually as if asking what he wanted for breakfast. "I don't know," Johnny admitted. "Next one heading north, I guess. Do you know how to hop a freight train?" "I've seen it done." "Seeing and doing are different things," Carrie said. "You could get killed trying to jump onto a moving train, break your neck, fall under the wheels. They'd send what's left of you back in a box, and I'd have to bury another son." Her voice didn't crack, but the weight of those words settled between them like a physical presence. Johnny swallowed hard. "I'm not trying to hurt you, Mama." "I know you're not. You're trying to stop hurting yourself. But pain doesn't work that way, Johnny. It follows you. You can run all the way to Memphis or California or anywhere else, and the guilt about Jack will still be there when you wake up." They sat in silence for several minutes. Then, in the distance, the sound of a train whistle cut through the night. Johnny tensed, ready to stand, to grab his bag, to prove he was serious about this. Carrie put her hand on his arm, not restraining him, just touching. "Wait, let this one pass. Let's watch it together." The freight train approached, its headlight cutting through the darkness, the rumble of its passage making the ground vibrate. It was going fast, not stopping, just rushing through Dias like the town didn't matter enough to slow down for. Johnny watched the cars pass, boxcars, tankers, flatbeds, and tried to imagine himself running alongside, grabbing a ladder, pulling himself aboard. The train disappeared into the distance, its sound fading until only the crickets remained. "Do you know where that train was going?" Carrie asked. "North. Memphis, maybe." "Maybe. Or maybe just the next junction where it switches tracks and heads somewhere else entirely." "You don't know because you didn't ask. You were just going to jump on and hope it took you somewhere better." She let that sit for a moment before continuing. "Let me ask you something, Johnny. Do you want to go to Memphis because you want to make music, or because you want to stop feeling this way?" The question hit harder than Johnny expected. He'd been thinking of them as the same thing. Music was the escape, the purpose, the answer. But Carrie's question forced him to separate them, and he didn't like what that separation revealed. "Both," he admitted quietly. "Then you're not ready," Carrie said, not unkindly. "If you're running away, you're just a scared boy on a train. If you're going toward something, you're a young man with a purpose. The train is the same, but you're different." Another train whistle sounded in the distance, this one from the south, heading north. They waited in silence as it approached. This one was slower, a passenger train with lit windows showing glimpses of people inside, travelers with tickets and destinations, people who knew where they were going. As it passed, Carrie said, "That train had people who chose to be on it. They bought tickets. They packed their bags knowing where they'd end up. They're not running. They're going." "I'm not just running," Johnny protested, though the conviction in his voice had weakened. "Aren't you? Tell me this. If you got to Memphis tomorrow with 73 cents and a harmonica, what's your plan? Where would you sleep? How would you eat? Who would help a 12-year-old boy with no family and no connections? You think music happens because you want it to, or because you work hard enough to deserve it?" Johnny had no answer. He'd imagined a rival, not the aftermath. He'd pictured himself playing music in Memphis without considering the 100 steps between jumping on a train and playing on a stage. Carrie pulled the blanket tighter around both of them. "I'm not telling you not to go to Memphis. I'm not saying music isn't your calling. I think it probably is. I've heard you singing when you think no one's listening, and there's something real there. But there's a difference between running away at 12 because you're hurt and leaving at the right time because you're ready." "When will I be ready?" Johnny asked, and he sounded younger than 12, small and scared, and wanting his mother to make the world make sense again. "I don't know," Carrie said honestly. "But you'll know when it's time. The trains will still be here, Johnny. They run every day. They're not going anywhere. But if you get on one tonight, you're just escaping. And escape isn't the same as freedom." They sat through 3 more trains that night. Each time one approached, Carrie asked the same question. "Do you know where this train will take you?" And each time Johnny had to admit he didn't. Not really. Not beyond away from here, which wasn't a destination at all. As dawn started breaking, painting the Arkansas sky in shades of pink and gold, the last train of the night passed. A freight train, slow-moving, with empty boxcars Johnny could have easily boarded. "This one," Carrie said. "This is the one you were planning to catch, isn't it?" "Last train before sunrise, slow enough to hop, heading north." Johnny nodded. "So go ahead. I won't stop you. But I want you to know something first." She turned to face him fully, and in the growing light he could see the exhaustion and grief and love in her face. "If you get on that train tonight, you're my son running away. If you wait, if you prepare, if you leave when you're ready and not just when you're scared, you'll be my son going toward his future." Same train, different person. Johnny looked at the train, at his mother, at the duffel bag that had seemed so necessary hours ago and now felt like evidence of impulse rather than planning. He thought about Jack, who would never get on any train, who would never have the choice to stay or go. "I'm not ready," Johnny whispered. "No," Carrie agreed, "but you will be." The train passed without them. They sat together as the sun rose fully, watching the tracks that would remain there, ready when he was. Carrie stood up, folded the blanket, and held out her hand. "Come on, let's go home. You can help me with breakfast before your father wakes up." They walked back through Dias as the town woke up around them, mother and son, both tired but somehow lighter. The duffel bag remained unpacked in Johnny's room for 3 days before he finally put everything back where it belonged. The 73 cents went into a jar on his dresser, and every week he added what little he could save. The jar filled slowly, pennies and nickels and occasional dimes. By the time Johnny turned 15, it held $11.47. By 17, nearly $40. He never spent it because it wasn't money anymore. It was proof that he was preparing, not just wishing. During those years, Johnny learned guitar properly instead of just strumming by ear. He worked the cotton fields and saved more money. He finished high school. He started performing at local gatherings, testing his voice and his songs on small audiences who knew him as Ray and Carrie's boy before they knew him as a musician. And he listened to the trains every night, counting them, learning their schedules, understanding where each one went and when, knowledge replacing desperate guessing. In 1950, when Johnny was 18, he enlisted in the Air Force. His mother walked him to the bus station, not the train tracks, but close enough to feel symbolic. He had a proper suitcase now, not a canvas duffel. He had orders and a destination. He knew exactly where he was going and why. Before he boarded the bus, Carrie pulled him aside. "Do you remember that night?" she asked. "When you were 12 and wanted to run away?" "Every day," Johnny admitted. "You're not running now," she said. It wasn't a question. "No, ma'am." "I'm going." She hugged him tightly, and he felt her tears against his neck. "Then go. And when you're ready to make music, you'll know. The trains will still be there." Johnny served in Germany, learned discipline, wrote hundreds of songs in notebooks he filled and mailed home for safekeeping. When he was discharged in 1954, he came back to Arkansas just long enough to see his family, collect those notebooks, and make his actual plan. Memphis. He'd been planning it for 10 years now. He had money saved, real money, not 73 cents. He had training. He had songs. He had a wife, Vivian, who believed in him enough to move to a city where they knew no one. He had everything except the guarantee of success, but he was no longer a 12-year-old boy hoping luck would carry him. He was a man with a purpose. This time, when Johnny Cash boarded a train to Memphis, Carrie wasn't there to walk him. She was home in Arkansas, praying for him and trusting that the lesson she'd taught him on those tracks a decade ago had taken root. The train was the same. The tracks were the same. Even the destination was the same Memphis he'd wanted to run to as a child. But Johnny was different. He wasn't escaping anything. He was moving towards something he'd spent 10 years preparing for. In Memphis, Johnny struggled. He sold appliances door to door. He auditioned for Sun Records and got rejected. He worked bad jobs and played small gigs and wondered if he'd made a mistake. But he didn't run, because Carrie had taught him the difference between running and persevering, and he carried that distinction like a compass. When Sam Phillips finally signed him in 1955, when Cry, Cry, Cry started getting radio play, when success began building, Johnny thought about that March night in 1944, about the trains he didn't catch, about his mother sitting on a blanket asking him questions he couldn't answer. If he'd run away at 12, he'd probably be dead or broken by now. 12-year-olds hopping freight trains didn't become recording artists. They became statistics, cautionary tales, missing persons nobody looked for very hard. But Johnny hadn't run. He'd waited, and the waiting had made all the difference. Years later, when Johnny's own children talked about running away or quitting when things got hard, he'd tell them about the night he almost hopped a train to Memphis, about his mother who walked him to the tracks instead of stopping him, about the question that changed everything. Do you want to leave because you're running from something or because you're ready for something? In 1963, Carrie Cash died of complications from surgery. Johnny was devastated, but not surprised. She'd been sick for years, her body finally giving out after a lifetime of poverty and hard work and burying a child. At her funeral, Johnny didn't sing. He couldn't. But he held the memory of that March night like a talisman, grateful beyond words for a mother wise enough to walk him to the edge of a mistake and patient enough to wait while he chose not to make it. After the funeral, Johnny went to the old house in Dyess. The train tracks were still there, unchanged, still carrying freight and passengers north toward Memphis and beyond. He walked to the spot where he and Carrie had sat that night, though there was no marker to indicate it, just his memory and the worn ground beside the rails. He stood there for over an hour, listening to trains pass, thinking about timing and readiness and the difference between running away and moving forward. A freight train approached, slow-moving, easy to hop. Johnny watched it pass, making no move to board, and smiled. He'd caught his train years ago. It had taken him exactly where he needed to go, precisely because he'd waited until he was ready to ride it. The lesson Carrie taught him that night became one of the foundational truths of Johnny's life. Patience isn't the same as giving up, and preparation isn't the same as procrastination. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is wait, not because you're scared, but because you're building yourself into someone capable of handling what comes next. The train he didn't catch at 12 allowed him to catch the right train at 23. And that made all the difference. Johnny carried that truth through addiction, through recovery, through career collapses and resurrections, through prison concerts and gospel albums, and everything that made him the man in black. When people asked what kept him going during the hard times, he'd often reference that night without explaining it fully. "My mama taught me that trains keep running," he'd say. "If you miss one, another comes. But you better make sure you're ready when you board, because once you're on, you're committed to the journey." In his final years, when Parkinson's and other ailments made performing difficult, when he knew his time was running short, Johnny thought often about that March night in 1944, about being 12 and desperate and convinced that escape was the answer, about his mother, who loved him enough to let him walk toward a mistake while making sure he understood what he was doing. He'd lived an extraordinary life. He'd made music that mattered. He'd touched millions of people, and none of it would have happened if he'd hopped that train at 12. Sometimes the most important journey is the one you don't take. Sometimes the most significant moment is when you choose to wait. And sometimes the greatest gift a parent can give a child is the wisdom to know the difference between running and going, between escaping and arriving, between the wrong time and the right time. The trains kept running through Dyess, Arkansas, carrying people north to Memphis and beyond. They ran past the spot where a mother and son once sat through a long night, watching opportunities pass, learning patience. And somewhere in that patience, in that choice to wait, Johnny Cash was born. Not the name, which he'd always had, but the artist, the legend, the voice that would define country music for generations. All because he missed a train he was supposed to miss, and caught one he was meant to catch, and learned from a mother who knew that sometimes the destination doesn't matter as much as being ready for the journey.